Over to you, Mr. Tong.
Thanks. Oh, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I think it's been a really intense session so far. The previous panel, the speakers this morning, has been really interesting. I'm just hoping to keep the momentum moving with that. As was introduced, my name is Hsien-Hui. I think part of the introduction was that I was a former entrepreneur myself. Obviously not as successful as our friends Sean and the rest of the previous panel who are well on their way to unicorn status if they are not already there. I did sell my company, and following that, I worked in the corporate world in areas like product development, strategy for a number of years before joining SGInnovate as the head of investments for the last 6 years. Now, we invest primarily in early stage emerging tech companies. So I think that particular experience has given me a ringside view as to the whole innovation journey from various perspectives, from the perspective of a corporate, from the perspective of a startup, and definitely from the perspective as an investor. But as they say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And the first step really is to identify what exactly are we talking about when we talk about innovation. I think most of you, when you see this particular slide, will probably relate to it on an immediate basis. You say, yeah, sure, innovation is about doing something cheaper, better, faster, something different from what you already see out there. That encapsulates, to a certain extent, the concept of innovation. But if you think a little bit more deeply into that, you'll realize that innovation is a little bit more than that. And that particular slide probably does not fully express the complexity of innovation today and how different parties, different stakeholders view it. What I'd like to do is to sort of bucket innovation into 4 broad categories. And all these categories are different dimensions of innovation. The first, obviously, is incremental innovation. Incremental innovation is literally what we just talked about. Cheaper, faster, better. It is within the same paradigm of the product. You're not moving too far outside of it. It is the easiest kind of innovation to actually get adopted within a corporate. And the reason for that is because they usually operate within well-defined markets, operate within well-defined business models, operate within well-defined manufacturing and distribution paradigms. Diversification. A lot of people view diversification like, it is about working or it is about partnering, it is about looking at adjacent markets, it is about looking at complementary products. But diversification can be a lot more than that. Innovation in diversification can be about putting together several good ideas and then forming a product that could potentially create an entirely new category. Now, it's apt that we are here at the Huawei event, and if you look back at the evolution of the handphone, it was a communication device at the very start. Some bright people said, why don't we put a camera onto it? Why don't we put a music player onto it? And then it slowly became something a little bit more than just a device that you relied on for communication. It now became the starting point of a lot more serious conversations with the whole society. And then when you added the app stores to it, it became a completely different platform, a digital identity platform. So diversification is another dimension of innovation. It's something also not too difficult for a corporate to wrap their minds around when they adopt innovation. The one that most of us think about when we look at innovation is disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation, I think all of you have heard of the example of Kodak, and the digital camera. I won't go into that again. Probably more relevant today would be how electric vehicles are disrupting the internal combustion engine vehicles on the roads today. There are also other disruptive technologies. For instance, the hydrogen economy is threatening to disrupt the fossil fuel economy. So disruptive innovations are a little bit challenging for a corporate to wrap their minds around. And the reason is because it is all about, cannibalizing possibly the existing businesses. It is also about, bridging and opening up completely new markets for which they are not familiar with. Finally, new platforms. New platforms are probably once in a generation kind of innovations. The last one was probably about 25 years ago with the internet. When the internet first came out, it was a toy at first. It was used by DARPA to sort of communicate, but soon when it spread out into the economy, it's totally and radically changed the way in which we operate, new business models, completely new companies that built their businesses around the internet and then sort of became the giants of today's economy. Today, if you were to ask me what has the potential to be a new platform, I would probably tell you decentralized finance is something which I think has a tremendous amount of potential to be a disruptive force, to be a completely new platform that will probably drive financing and the financial ecosystem for the next 30 to 40 years. So what are corporate innovation drivers? What is driving innovation within the ecosystem? If everyone is satisfied, if there are no changes that are desired by both the customers as well as the providers, the corporates, then obviously there will be minimal amount of innovation. But that's not the way the world works today. There are existential threats. COVID-19 is a good example of an existential threat. If you had told me in 2019 or early 2019, that a population-level vaccine would be approved based on a completely new platform that had never been approved by the FDA, I would have given you long odds for that. But it did, and it showed existential threats show how everyone comes together, they adopt the best solution for the problem, and they put sort of politics and all the other issues to one side. Although I think there's still quite a bit of that, as they tried to roll out the vaccine. Which brings me to the next one. In general, I don't like to talk about politics because I'm a capitalist at heart. I believe that the economy will always trump political ideology. But the truth is, today we are looking at the polarization of tech. I think that there are tremendous opportunities there because people will then try to leapfrog each other by adopting the latest technologies. Socio-economic trends, I think this was mentioned earlier on in some of the other speeches. These are the broad trends that drive the economy today. Digitalization is one. Another one is sustainability. These two trends are definitely going to be around for the next 5 to 10 years, if not longer, because they are going to define how the economy is going to operate. Competition, I won't say much. I think all of you have seen it. Situational factors are different from existential threats in that they are really about the local and regional dimension of the problem. And they also represent innovation opportunities, but more at a local level. And then emerging technologies, I don't think we need to talk too much about that. And visionary leaders. I think we have seen many examples of visionary leaders, and what differentiates them from great leaders is their ability to very clearly identify what their vision is, their desire to put resources behind it, and not only to adopt new technologies, but even to create new technologies. Now, fundamentally, all these drivers feed, from a corporate perspective, feed into a business strategy. And what I've seen happen, and that has happened in my own experience as well, is that the innovation strategy and the business strategy are distinct. To my mind, that is a bit like, you're running 100 meters in an 800-meter race. You're not fully getting the value of your innovation strategy by, not incorporating it or embedding it within a broader business strategy. And that is the failing that a lot of corporates make. The business strategy is separate, business use it, the business side are supposed to deliver the numbers, and innovation is separate. But the problem is that when innovation gets to a certain stage and it needs more resources, the business side is not willing to support it. So I've seen that as one of the failings of corporate. So I'm going to have to speed it up a little bit. My apologies. So what's a startup's pathway of commercialization? In general, you start with R&D. We focus on emerging technology, so we focus on R&D. And then a market opportunity is identified. I think Aaron at Carroll said something along those lines during the panel session as well. You identify your market opportunity, you build your proof of concept, then you've got a minimum viable product, if that's the next step, and then domestic traction and international growth. Now, it's very nice to see the whole pathway in a linear fashion. The reality is that if you're a startup founder, it is going to be more like a game of snakes and ladders. You know, you're going to hit the MVP, and then after that, the market is going to tell you that this is not what they want, and you go back to proof of concept, and then you move forward to domestic traction. They tell you the market opportunity isn't there. You know, you're always constantly moving forwards and backwards along that particular line. But I suppose from the startup perspective, everyone's journey is different. So some will have that linear growth, some will be going up and down on this timeline. From a corporate perspective, it is about the starting point, or most of corporate innovation, or most of their innovation journey is minimal engagement or minimal investment in time and resources. So IP licensing is usually is the starting point for a lot of corporates. I'm not saying all, I'm just saying a few, or quite a number of them based on my experience. And then subsequently, they move on to things like hackathons, and I'm using hackathons in its broadest possible definition. I mean, within that is, I would also include, tech scouting, competitions, activities that are one-off, that, are not designed for sustainability. And then subsequently, if a corporate believes that, there is an angle there, then they start to look at things like, investing a bit more into accelerators, and then building even internal startups to be spun off. And of course, the last is corporate venture capital, where you're actually putting, financial resources into placing bets on potential future acquisitions or participating in future growth. So actually, I was fascinated to see the presentation by Leo just now as to what Huawei Sparks is doing. Truly amazing. I think that they are definitely well on the way on their journey, and I think that it's going to be a very interesting program. But what are common roadblocks within this startup corporate partnership? And this is something that I've seen quite often. The first is that the product or service is not mature enough. So a lot of startup founders tend to, and I've been one before, we tend to exaggerate the stage and sophistication of the product. When we start to engage with the corporate is not ready to integrate that with what they are currently doing, and then the whole relationship sort of falls apart. The second is that the product or service only solves part of a bigger problem. If you are a filtration technology startup, for instance, and the company is looking into a hydrogen reactor, then I think unless they find the other parts to that solution, it's going to take a long time before you gain any traction with that. The startup has insufficient resources to support collaboration, because sometimes the opportunity cost of engaging with a corporate can actually be quite considerable. It's not like the corporate will pay for everything, nor should they, but they have to take a look at, does it make any sense as a startup to put that amount of effort and resources behind trying to work with a corporate versus spreading out the risk. On the flip side, the corporate themselves may have a change of heart. And this is pretty common as well, change of strategy, change of focus. That is the reason why it's quite a number of these programs fail. And then, of course, there's a perception that the startup will benefit competitors. This is especially apparent for AI companies, where the corporate withholds part of the data set and does not allow the startup to actually build a more comprehensive solution, because there's a fear that this product will benefit their competitors. And finally, of course, and this was alluded to again on the panel, which I just heard, is the cultural mismatch. If you are trying to work with, let's say, a Chinese or an American corporate, they have their way of doing things. You're a startup, you have your way of doing things. I think fundamentally, all these are factors that can potentially be roadblocks in the startup corporate partnership. So I have about 30 seconds left before my time is up. I think if you were to do 3 takeaways from what I've just said, the first is that I think there has to be an alignment in expectations when a startup and a corporate engage. The second is that you have got to quantify the expected outcomes. it has to be numbers, it has to be number-driven, it has to be quantifiable, it cannot be on the basis that I like you, you like me kind of thing. And finally, I think, don't put all your eggs in one basket, if that would be my advice to startups. Try to spread the risk around. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I've got a lot more slides. That's what my PR team wanted me to present, but I'm afraid that that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tong. SGInnovate.